I started hearing about the murders that were happening in care homes and hospitals with, well, we call it involuntary euthanasia, but it is actually murder. People were being put on this new COVID protocol that had been brought in. It was called NG163. That was almost identical to the LCP, the Liverpool Care Pathway, which had been abolished in 2014 because it was deemed barbaric. And then suddenly there's this new protocol. And when you actually looked at the details of it, they claimed it was to treat COVID. But when you actually read what it involved, it was identical to the LCP. So it involved withholding food, withholding fluids, withholding essential medications, and the administration of end of life drugs, usually a benzodiazepine such as midazolam and an opioid such as morphine, which should never be used together. You can look at the pages of the British National Formulary where it says very clearly those benzodiazepines and opioids should never be used together because they depress respiration. And if you continue to administer those two drugs together through a syringe driver, which was what was happening in pretty much 99% of the cases, that will eventually lead to death. So Matt Hancock put this new protocol in front of a panel of professors and doctors. One of them was Sam Ahmedzi, who's one of the most well-known and amazing palliative care specialists in the world. And he wrote an article basically saying this protocol should not be used because it will kill people. And they all signed it, and you can still see the article. It's in the British Medical Journal online, and it's still there for all to see. And Matt Hancock said, thanks very much, and implemented it anyway. So suddenly anyone going into hospital with even with a minor respiratory issue or anything that was deemed to be COVID or anything, after someone was tested and they got a positive result with the not fit for purpose test that called it COVID, they were put on this pathway. But also people were being put on it who didn't have any kind of respiratory issue. So I started talking to people so one lady said, oh, my mum had a dizzy spell and went into hospital. She was absolutely fine. She'd been out line dancing the night before, doing a bit of baking, came over a bit dizzy, decided to go to A&E and was dead within 29 hours. And there had been nothing wrong with her before. So I thought this, and I was hearing more and more stories like this. And the more I talked about them on podcasts, and at that point I had a show as well. So I was getting a lot of these people on as guests and a lot of whistleblowing doctors and stuff like that coming on. And like David, you came on a few times as well, didn't you, on my UNN show? So the word was getting out, and the more the word got out, the more people came to me, and the more stories I was hearing, they're piling up. So I thought I need to get these stories into the paper, into the mainstream newspapers, because this is important. People are being murdered, and everyone needs to know. And of course, the papers didn't want that story either. And I was like, but this is really important. If you don't run this story, you'll have blood on your hands, because you can stop this happening. If we get it into the Daily Mail and get it into the Telegraph and the Express. And I spoke to a lot of the editors, and they were just very resistant. I met two editors face to face. I met the news editor of the Daily Mail in 2021. I brought the first person who came to me with their story because he had incontrovertible evidence, a big file of it, that his father had been murdered in an NHS facility. And they leafed through that at both separate meetings. And by the end of the meetings, they were like, this is huge. This is headline news. This is massive. And I thought, good, we're finally getting through to them. And then they just went back to their offices and would never hear from them again. And this happened a few times. And then I realised this is deliberate now. It's not just that they've forgotten or gone off the idea, because they both said to my face that this was a big frontline, the headline front page story, So yeah, I had those meetings and then continued to try and get the papers to write something, tried to get news channels to talk about it. I emailed all the mainstream news channels, including GB News at that point, and as soon as that was set up, and then no one was interested at that point. So I thought, well, let's make it into a film, because by this point I had probably about 20 people who were willing to, be quoted either in a news article or appear in a film. So
What were you getting though, Jackie, at the time? Were you getting conversations? Was a dialogue happening, or was it just that ignoring you, like some sort
um,
of test?
mainly
Imitation?
ignoring, mainly ignoring. I don't know what they're thinking, but they don't respond. So I haven't given up though. I'll still be sending it out every month or so just to see if, because at some point they will go, yes, I know they will, when it's like many, many years too late. It could be like the
They do occasionally, Jackie. We see it occasionally in the Daily Fail and we see it in the Express. Occasionally they'll drop a little nugget in, won't they, about vaccine injury syndrome, etc.
Well, it's
But
like 5 years too late though, because I was sending those stories to them in January
yeah,
21, and not those actual stories that they're using, but the stories of what was happening. They weren't allowed to report it then, or they weren't ready to report it then, but they are now for some reason.
so
If
for that to happen, though, Jackie, there's got to have been a directive, hasn't there? Like Operation Talent, there's got to be a directive to the very top, which finds its way down the chain, and they've said, look, do not publish any stories to do with vaccine injury or midazolam. And
yeah,
just to back you up on this, as a doctor, I was seeing this. I was seeing the blanket DNAR policies on everyone. Anyone who was mental, old, had cancer, anything dementia, they'd get a DNAR as issued as standard, as it were. And I was tasked with the job at the very beginning of the pandemic to go around. I didn't ever do this, by the way. Just they were asking me to do home visits when we were all in lockdown, to go and visit the local old person that had got dementia and had carers in 4 times a day and make a judgment to say, is this person, it's called a treatment escalation plan. That's how they tarted it up. And essentially you'd make a judgment without any family, without the patient involvement. Is this person, if they got COVID, is this a life worth saving? Essentially, that was
of
it.
course, of course,
Yeah, and
no
you,
one.
when you'd fill in the form then if you were one of the ostrich syndrome sufferers, and you'd fill in the form, and that led to a DNAR policy. Red form would be filled in. You'd escalate it to the ambulance crew and say, if this person ever rings 999 or 111, their ceiling of treatment is in the home. And
Yeah,
following that, you'd obviously then receive the directive to fill in the syringe driver and the just in case, as they called it, just in case medicines. So as standard, you'd get, don't escalate to hospital. Is their life worth living? Let's do a DNAR if their heart was to stop, without questioning anyone. And then you get the syringe driver and the just in case stat doses written up. And this was
yeah,
so that people in the height of the pandemic, if somebody was dying a nasty death, and there is a role, I've always said this, Jackie, we don't differ on this, that people can die really nasty deaths. And at the very, very, very end of life, you may need a little bit of an anxiolytic or an antiemetic or something to stop respiratory secretions or pain. They're the
yeah,
4 reasons. But what they were doing is they were preemptively loading people before they were in the dying phase of their illness, if at all, with these syringe drivers full of these synergistic respiratory depressants. And
yeah.
people, I've seen it with my own medical colleagues where my senior doctor has gone in and killed someone, actively killed someone that needed to just go to surgery and have an abscess debrided. And I've got the screenshots. I went to the police, I went to the GMC, no comment, no action, heads down. And so I'm just saying that to back Jackie up, that DNAR blanket policy was true. Preemptive, just in case medication was a thing. People were being told to use them at will as they see fit. As one of my podcast guests said recently, they were handed a vial of midazolam and told to use it as they see fit. How
Yeah.
sinister is that? And going back to the journalism there, Jackie, so this lockstep ban on posting, publishing, anything to do with it, how sinister. And it
Yeah.
seemed to be overnight that this memo has obviously found its way out to the editors and the underlings to the editors. Obviously not to you as a journalist interested in journalism. Why would an editor not want to post an article about blanket DNARs and preemptive culling of people that are elderly or have their learning disabilities?